Chapter 4 of the Black Extended Family: Absorption and Informal Adoption. Family members who are homeless or are unable to care for themselves for reasons of age, sickness, unemployment, or whatever may be taken into the household of a relative. This absorption mechanism is an important facet of the mutual aid system within the Black extended family. Most dependent family members come to live with their relatives on a temporary basis until they are back on their feet again. Homes must be open for dependent family members at any moment if the absorption mechanism is at work. The extended family structure has to be flexible. It's stable enough to withstand the changes that occur as family members go in and out of the base household and the sub-extended family households. The first option for anyone in need of a place to stay is the family house, home to all family members no matter where they have been living. A base household may take in a cousin, an uncle, a brother, one person or several, a baby, or an elderly person. It can consist of 3 family members 1 month and 10 the next. 1 generation today and 3 tomorrow. It can accommodate 1 family member temporarily until he can find work, while accommodating another for the rest of his life. The Roman family gives some indication of how flexible the base household has to be in order to absorb family members. The number of relatives absorbed, the number of years they remained, and the reason they came to reside at the Roman base household are presented in Table 1. The table does not show the many occasions when family members have had to move into the extended family household for a few days, a few weeks, or a few months at a time. The shape of the base household depends on the degree to which the sub-extended families can absorb homeless family members. When the base household cannot absorb any more family members, it suffers a severe strain, and the sub-extended families must be flexible and stable enough to provide refuge. If neither the base household nor the sub-extended family households can absorb, the extended family ceases to serve the function of promoting the welfare of its members. New dependent family members will have to seek other options to make it as best as they can on their own, take to the streets, or depend on the assistance provided by various societal institutions. As the extended family becomes more rigid, the chances that its members will be absorbed by prisons, reform schools, foster homes, public welfare agencies, and nursing homes for the elderly will increase. Informal adoption. Why is it necessary? Children are absorbed into the homes of relatives at a much greater rate than adults. Though absorbing children into stable households within the extended family presents a greater problem than absorbing adults. Nevertheless, the extended family is specifically characterized by its informal adoption of children. This process results largely from the inability of a family member to give the adequate care to his or her offspring, and from the willingness of other family members to take one, some, or all of the children into their household on either a temporary or on a permanent basis. Informal adoption has not gone without notice in studies of the black family. Charles S. Johnson wrote that the adoption of children is a fairly common practice among black families. Melvin Hershkovitz saw the practice as a carryover from the African past. Carol B. Stack discussed the role of child-keeping in black kinship networks. Robert Hill saw informal adoption as an example of black family strengths. We estimate that more than 160,000 out-of-wedlock babies were absorbed in 1969 by already existing families. This absorption helps to minimize the number of new black families headed by single women. This feat of self-help among black families is remarkable when one realizes their precarious economic position. In most cases, it is difficult enough for them to provide adequately for their own children without taking in additional ones. The bonds between relatives must indeed be tight, and the value placed upon children very high for such a rate of absorption of adoption of additional children to occur so regularly among these families. Informal adoptions occur mainly out of economic necessity. Often the parents simply do not have the resources adequately to care for their children because they are too young or out of work or have more children than they can provide for. The child to be adopted is usually the first, last, or only child of a sub-extended family having trouble making ends meet. One aged, dominant family figure, Mona Tyler, explained that the first child is usually taken in because it is born out of wedlock and its mother cannot take care of it, or because the mother and father are not ready, money-wise, to have children. She held the last child is often taken in because its parents can't afford to take care of another child. Children born out of wedlock are most often subject to informal adoption. It is not uncommon for both mother and child to remain in the home of their relatives, usually the mother's parents or grandparents, until the mother is able to take care of her own child. Children born out of wedlock to a younger family member may be taken in because the relatives consider the young mother too immature to care for them properly. A male who assumes responsibility for a child he fathered out of wedlock may bring the child home to its own extended family base or to a sub-extended family household. There are other reasons, too, for informal adoption. Children may be taken in because they create a physical strain on a mother who is pregnant or a parent who is ill. Because of the death of one or both parents, or even because the natural parents are unable to discipline their children. For example, one 15-year-old living with his parents in Kansas City was sent to live with his grandmother in Rivertown County because his parents were unable to keep him from associating with a gang known to use dope. Not only was the teenager taken out of the gang environment, but he was also subjected to old-fashioned, time-proven discipline. Family members may take in a child who has fallen victim to abuse and neglect by his parents. Some even feel obligated to take the child away from his parents without the parents' permission. When Carrie, a key member of the Henson extended family, found that her brother and his wife were not adequately feeding and clothing their 2 children, she simply took them to live with her and refused to give them back when their parents demanded that she do so. Both children were less than 5 years old when Carrie took them in. At the time of our talks with her, both were still living with her in Popewood County, Florida, and both were attending college. Sometimes family members do not want their children. They may see them as depriving them of their freedom or of the natural comforts of life. In some cases, they cheerfully turn their children over to any family member who is willing to take them in. In other cases, it is so obvious that children are unwanted and unloved by their parents that relatives take them to save them from emotional damage, from desertion by their parents, or from legal adoption. This happened in the Willis extended family when Quincy Willis showed disfavor toward a child he thought was not his. His wife was unsuccessful in convincing him that the child was his. Quincy thought the baby looked like one of his wife's former boyfriends. The tension, I'm going to repeat that. This happened in the Willis extended family when Quincy Willis showed disfavor toward a child he thought was not his. His wife was unsuccessful in convincing him that the child was his. Quincy thought that the baby looked like one of his wife's former boyfriends. The tension that the child's presence created in the family prompted one of Quincy's sisters to take the child into her own household. Some children are given up to family members who are living alone and want the satisfaction of raising a child. For example, when Laura Tyler was left alone after the death of her husband, she wanted to compensate for the loss by raising children. Her sister allowed 1 child, and Denise allowed 2 of her children to go live with Laura. The children gave her companionship, and Laura in turn was able to give children a good home and at the same time relieve the children's parents of some of their financial pressure. Other reasons for adopting. Many extended family members wish that there was no need for informal adoption. Aside from the need, however, there are other reasons and even incentives for adopting. First, a person who takes in a relative's child gains status. He receives respect and gratitude since he is showing a strong concern for the well-being of the family. He relieves family members of an economic and emotional burden. Second, some family members who informally adopt children of relatives feel an obligation to do so because they themselves were taken in by relatives when they were born. Third, age-dominant family figures are sometimes willing to adopt and raise children, grandchildren, because it gives them a second chance to be successful at raising children. They may have been unable, for various reasons, to raise their own children in the way they would have liked to. Fourth, family members feel some obligation to help their own sons and daughters by taking in some of their grandchildren and by taking full responsibility for their care. Such help may be temporary or until the children's parents are physically or economically or emotionally able to do the job themselves, or it may be a permanent arrangement. Fifth, family members are extremely reluctant to turn dependent children over non-relatives. Charles S. Johnson observed this years ago. Sixth, and in the same vein, family members are willing to take in children of their relatives in order to prevent they're being put up for legal adoption. Again, Charles S. Johnson's observations were consistent with ours when he wrote that informal adoption, in a sense, takes the place of social agencies and orphans' homes. All those we talked to confirmed that if their children could not stay in the family, they would rather have them taken in by non-relatives than placed in institutions. Many felt that it did not matter whether the persons who legally adopted the children were black or white, so long as they loved and took care of the children. Some even claimed that if their children had to be legally adopted, they would prefer as adopted parents middle and upper class whites. Some even claimed that if their children had to be legally adopted, they would prefer as adoptive parents. Some even claimed that if their children had to be legally adopted, they would prefer as adoptive parents middle and upper class whites who could more easily provide with, among other things, a good education. When asked how such adoptions might affect a black child's racial identity, one young extended family member voiced the opinion of a number of others when she stated that belonging to black families does not mean you are not going to have trouble with your blackness. It was black people, not whites, who tried to make me feel ashamed because of my skin. When asked how such adoptions might affect a black child's racial identity, one young extended family member voiced the opinion of a number of others when she stated that belonging to black families does not mean you are not going to have trouble with your blackness. It was black people, not whites, who tried to make me feel ashamed because my skin was darker than theirs. Strains. Each time a dependent child is born into the extended family network, a strain is placed on the already scarce economic resources of the extended family. Once the extended family network reaches its maximum capacity to provide, family members become more inclined to submit to abortions. I'm going to repeat all this because it's such a heavy thing for me. Strains. Each time a dependent child is born into the extended family network, a strain is placed on the already scarce economic resources of the extended family. Once the extended family network reaches its maximum capacity to provide, family members become more inclined to submit to abortions or to abandon their babies to foster homes. Several of the age-dominant family figures, though instrumental in raising many of their grandchildren, admitted they were less willing to raise any more children. Not so much because they are too sick or too old, but because, as one of them put it, children nowadays do not mind or respect their elders. Hence, aged dominant family figures are becoming less willing to raise the children of family members while being more willing to inculcate in family members the philosophy that they should either raise their own children or practice birth control. One young woman in our study stated that the only reason she failed to follow her first impulse to have an abortion when she learned she was pregnant was that she did not know where to have it performed. She hid the fact of her pregnancy from her family, and when it was time to give birth, she and her friend delivered the baby themselves. A few days later, she wrapped the child and placed it in a garbage bag. After 2 hours of feeling like a murderess, she went back and removed the baby, which was alive and healthy. She packed her bags and went home with her baby to live with her grandchildren. The young woman had decided to get rid of the baby because she knew she could not take care of it and believed her family could not do so either. The extended family has not always exerted enough influence to stop family members from getting abortions. Still, because women who have babies out of wedlock are not stigmatized, because informal adoption is a common practice in the extended family, and because parents with dependent children can generally depend on relatives for support, parents can more easily keep their children. Placing the baby in garbage can is obviously not the answer, even if, in the words of the grandmother of the young mother who tried it, you have to make a way out of no way. But as more and more babies are brought into already overburdened extended families, an increasing number of black women may turn to abortion. Treatment of adopted children. Informally adopted children are treated no differently from any other children within the extended family network. We found from our own observations, as Charles S. Johnson did from his in the 1930s, that adult members of the family strive to treat each other equally, no matter what the kinship relationship may be. Those living in the household base are taught to view cousins living in the same household as if they were brothers and sisters. Each child is given a fair share of food, clothing, and shelter. An attempt is made to see that they all complete their education, at least through high school. A child who is deaf, sickly, retarded, or like many receive special attention, but only as dictated by the nature of his handicap. Although it is ardently hoped that all family members will be married and financially independent before having children, we found no distinction made between dependent, illegitimate children and parentally provided for legitimate children, though there may be disappointment provided for legitimate children, though there may be disappointment that a family member is going to have a baby out of wedlock. Once that baby arrives, neither mother nor child is treated any differently from anyone else in the family. Many of the relatives may have themselves had babies out of wedlock and thus attach little more significance to the situation. We found, too, that whether or not the father helps provide for his child, that child is usually told at a very early age who his father is and is given some details, good or bad, about his father's life. Hence, few children grow up feeling that they are without fathers. As we saw earlier, uncles, grandfathers, nephews, older brothers, cousins, and boyfriends also serve as father figures. Children born out of wedlock in the extended family seldom grow up feeling stigmatized or are seldom, if ever, referred to as illegitimate. Informally adopted children often treat the age-dominant figure with a special deference. They recognize and make a distinction between their adoptive mother and their real mother. Often the children compete with one another to stay in their grandmother's favor. Grandmothers sometimes have just as much authority over their grandchildren as the natural mothers do. When a child feels his natural mother has been unjust, he may plead his case before his grandmother, whose word is generally law. This may be why few children in the extended family base household refer to their grandmothers as such. They tend to call their grandmother Mama and their natural mother Mama Mary, Mama Dorothy, or whatever. They may call their natural mother by their first name only. One group of children in our study call their mother Little Mama and their grandmother Big Mama. An aunt, too, may be called Mama, especially if she is the adopted mother or the subdominant or dominant family figure. This practice is common among blacks in other countries as well as America. In her study of black family life in Jamaica, Edith Clark notes that a child will copy their behavior pattern toward the mother of her brothers and sisters and be taught to obey and respect the grandmother as the head of the family. An informally adopted child, illegitimate or otherwise, may be so fully accepted within the family network that he believes himself his grandmother's favorite child, nor does he receive any adverse treatment in the black community on the whole, aside from neighborhood gossip. In many black communities, informal adoption is considered no big deal.